We have Mr. Tan Sri Dr. M. Kayveas, former minister and current advisor to the Ministry of Transport, Malaysia. We have His Excellency Richard Morris, the Ambassador of the British Embassy in Kathmandu. His Excellency Asfaw Dingamo Kame, the Ambassador of Ethiopia to India. Ms. Michelle Simmons, General Manager, Microsoft Asia Pacific. And Ms. Wendy Werner, Country Manager, IFC. And last but not the least, ladies and gentlemen, the chair of the session. The session is being chaired by Honorable Dr. Swarnim Wagle, the member, National Planning Commission. Dr. Swarnim Wagle is the member of National Planning Commission. He was also the member of NPC between May 2014 and November 2015. In the aftermath of the April earthquakes in Nepal in 2015, he co-led the preparation of the Post-Disaster Needs Assessment, that is the PDNA, and headed the country delegation to the 3rd UN Conference on Financing for Development, in fact. Dr. Wagle has worked for more than 15 years on policy assignments in over 20 countries, most recently as senior economist at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. He is trained as an economist at Australian National University, Harvard University, and London School of Economics. Said that, I have the pleasure now to hand over the session to the floor chair.
Usual problem with mics. Is it working now? Okay. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this session, the final session of the day, sandwiched between two very interesting programs. The keynote, as we just heard from the Honorable Minister of Finance from India, and I think there's a cultural event and dinner after this session. I'm honored to chair this very distinguished panel. I think they were briefly introduced, but let me reintroduce them just to set the context on the diversity of perspectives and different sectors and countries they represent. To my left is Ms. Michelle Simmons. She's a manager at Microsoft based in Singapore. Ambassador Kame here is the ambassador of Ethiopia to India. Ms. Wendy Werner is the country manager of IFC. Dr. Kayveas is a former minister from Malaysia in charge of transport issues. And Ambassador Richard Morris, the resident ambassador of Great Britain to Nepal. I think we have a range of topics reflected in this panel: ICT, investment climate, different dimensions of FDI, foreign direct investment, sort of the northern perspective from Ambassador Morris, and the southern perspective from Ambassador Kame, issues of transportation and infrastructure from Malaysia. So I think this is going to be a rich discussion. The plan is I'll make a few opening remarks, then I'll start with a few basic questions on the part of the panelists. We'll probably go for 2 rounds if time permits, and we'll also open the floor for some questions, and we'll conclude. I think I missed some of the sessions in between, but we had an excellent start to this summit with the inauguration session. The Right Honorable Prime Minister, the major political leaders from all the parties, former prime ministers, expressing a degree of political commitment that I have not seen before. A lot of these statements are scripted and very stiffly presented, but today we saw a degree of spontaneity, I think, which was very remarkable in the Nepali context. And I think that reflects that we've had enough of politics. Time has now come for Nepal to really shift gears and adopt an economic agenda that matches some of the very remarkable social and political achievements that we've secured in the last 2 decades. It was also good news for me personally, because one of the prerequisites of attracting large-scale foreign investment is often cited to be political stability and policy consistency. So what we heard this morning was that even in a hypothetical environment of political instability going forward, I think there's a degree of commitment on the part of our most senior leaders to ensure that there is policy consistency, even in an environment of political instability. So that message I thought was remarkable. Dr. Mahat talked about it, that time has come for industrial renaissance. We need to rekindle the spirit of economic reform that we had seen in the early 90s, when we opened up the economy to trade, investment, enterprises, delicensing, deregulation, massive private sector participation, not just in the economic sectors like aviation, telecom, banking, but also in the social sectors. So even though our economic growth rate has been sluggish and stagnant in the last 2 decades, after that earlier high in the early 90s, social achievements in Nepal have been quite remarkable. Human development indices, social progress indices, and a lot of that, the foundation for that achievement was laid in the early 90s. We have been distracted, as we all know, with conflict and post-conflict management, but with a progressive constitution that was issued in 2015, I think it gives us a credible roadmap to prosperity looking forward. And so time has come really to revisit that earlier era of success from the early 90s and take it from there. So this event could not have been timed at a more appropriate moment in Nepali history. New foreign investment, trade, PPP policies have been enacted and acts have been enacted. There's a new trade policy, there's a new IP policy, there's a new company act, there's a new mining policy, there's a new banking and finance act that is passed. Together, cumulatively, I think it undergirds this much needed policy departure to signal to investors, both at home and abroad, that Nepal is back on the map, it's ready to go, and we really need to aspire to a higher level of economic growth based on a forward-looking, more open, more liberal economic policies. So that's where we stand right now. And in my questions to the panel, I think I'd like to focus on 3 pillars. First, the policies, the generic suite of sectoral reforms. You know, when you talk about FDI, if you look at the literature, a lot of the focus is on foreign equity ownership, acquiring industrial land. What kind of policies do we have in place to mediate commercial disputes? Simple rules and procedures on setting up a foreign subsidiary, the number of days, number of paperwork it takes to get these things done. Do we have adequate investment protection and promotion measures in place, the BITs, the bilateral investment treaties, or BIPAs? What are the rules and regulations on transferring and converting currency? What kind of regulations do we have in place for attracting skilled expatriates? So those are the sort of the policy pillar associated with attracting large-scale investment. And the second pillar is on infrastructure. You know, do we have the energy? Do we have the roads? Do we have the human resources? Industrial land issues. And third, which I think in Nepal is not much discussed, is the attitude to foreign investment. How welcoming are we to investors in general, but also to investors from our neighboring countries? So that's, with that kind of context setting, let me start with Ms. Simmons from Microsoft. We hear a lot about, you know, the 100 things that you need to get things right to attract large-scale investment. And people talk about China, India, and some of the other successes. But a country like Nepal, you know, coming out of a protracted conflict, instability, trying to get a hang of these things, you know, trying to get started. People often talk about the importance of anchor investment. A big brand name like Microsoft, like Google, like Intel, choosing to locate in a country like Nepal or an emerging economy, that suddenly creates this signal to other investors that that particular country is ripe for business and would be a credible, attractive location for FDI. So my question to you is, touching on both the industry that you represent and also the company that you come from, what would it take for a company, a global leader like Microsoft, to even consider locating in a country like Nepal and starting their operations in a country like ours?
Thank you. Before I answer that question, I think it's best to start with just a brief overview of trends that we're seeing from a technology perspective, just to set the tone. What's happening globally is that we have an immense amount of data that's being created. That data is being created due to what we call the Internet of Things, so everything, your mobile phones, devices, being connected to the internet, and that will create more than 50 zettabytes of data by 2020. So that amount of data is just incomprehensible. The second trend is that with all this data, we have the ability to derive new insights that we perhaps didn't have the ability to understand before. We can start connecting what appears to be totally disconnected information and seeing that together there's insight and trends to be created from that. And then the third trend that we're seeing is around cloud technology and how the cloud actually enables governments, countries, businesses to take advantage of these other two trends. So with all that said, we still have 60% of the world that's actually excluded from the digital economy. And so I think that really leads us to, or leads me to the first point of what's necessary, and that is IT skills capacity in the country. We heard earlier that Nepal has an extremely young population. I believe the average age is, or the median age is 23.6. That's an incredibly young population, which is a great opportunity actually for Nepal in, from a technology perspective. However, the jobs that are going to exist in 10 years, 20 years, don't even exist today. So the first thing that's necessary is to build a real robust HR, or human resources, I should say, with appropriate IT skills. We also saw earlier today on one of the slides talking about industries that there are only 5,500 students from university going into the workforce in ICT roles. And with the millions of students, what would be necessary is to see more students graduating with ICT skills to feed companies like Microsoft. The second area is around infrastructure, and that first has to do with connectivity. So ensuring that basic connectivity is available. There's more mobile phone. There's a high degree, I believe it's 118% mobile phone penetration, and so that's a good sign in Nepal. But what also needs to happen is to have even more smartphone, because that's often the first device that many individuals have in their first introduction to technology. And providing connectivity, whether that's 3G, 4G, whether that's fixed line or lines, or whether that's different types of technology like TV white space, which is something that Microsoft has advocated for to really reach rural areas and provide connectivity in places that may not be reachable from a cellular tower, for example. The other aspect of infrastructure has to do with the cloud, so ensuring that the government supports the use of cloud technology, because that is actually what allows countries like Nepal to leapfrog. One of the great advantages of the trends I was talking about is that no matter the size of the country, from a population perspective, economic perspective, they can leverage the benefits of the cloud to digitize and to bring new opportunities, whether that's in healthcare or whether that's within the government, to create transparency. But this is an important aspect to address. And then the final area that I would say has to do with policy and legal framework, which you called out earlier. And I think there's really three areas from a policy perspective. The first is around cloud, which I just mentioned, and ensuring that there's a policy that is favorable for cloud technology. The second is around intellectual property rights, and I was really pleased to see earlier today that IPR is being addressed. We need to have good policy resulting around IPR, but also good enforcement. And IPR is not just important for companies like Microsoft, but it's for the companies that build their businesses on top of platforms. So Microsoft's a platform company. We want to see those youth who have skills in IT to then develop startups, build businesses using technology. And they will need to also have their products, their solutions covered from an intellectual property rights perspective. And then the final thing from a policy perspective is transparency and ensuring that there's proper transparency built into the system. And that's something that certainly technology can enable.
Excellent. Thank you very much for reinforcing the importance of many of the things that we've been talking about. Your speaking on these issues is quite authoritative because you deal with this sector in the region. So infrastructure, connectivity, legal basis, IT background is extremely important. But what I take away from your statement is also this tantalizing possibility that Nepal can really leapfrog using ICT technologies. The landline subscription is still 3%, but mobile cellular subscription is 118% in Nepal. So just 20 years ago, I remember folks, queuing up and lobbying the ministers for a simple land collection. And today, you go to the most remote corners of Nepal, and people are using Facebook, and they have smartphones on their phone. So how do we leverage this massively optimistic new technology to really catch up and leapfrog? Is an extremely important point. Let me go next to Ms. Werner, Wendy from IFC. If there's one international agency in the world that has popularized the term investment climate, it's probably your organization, the International Finance Corporation. But investment climate is like caressing this blind man caressing an elephant. It's too broad and quite vague at times. So the challenge for policymakers is where do you start? You can't possibly do everything, the 100 things that are often listed as the things we ought to do. Where do we start? And we also see this, for the doing business indicators, for example, that comes out of the World Bank Group. Countries like Nepal actually do reasonably well on paper, sort of the de jure kind of reflection. We actually rank higher than India. But that does not translate into these massive flows in investment. So, what's the catch here? Where do we start, given that the whole agenda of investment climate is just too big? How do we prioritize issues? How do we identify the most binding constraints in a particular country? So maybe you could, share your insights on your work in the region and work in Nepal also.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Wagle. So as you highlighted, the International Finance Corporation is the largest international financial institution focused on the private sector. And so one of our core, one of our top articles, our top purpose of being is not only to make investments, but to improve private sector development, basically raise the overall situation for the private sector in all of the developing countries that we work in. And that's part of our development objectives as well. So it's a great question, and it's not an easy area to try to address what seems like a very huge problem and very complex to just improve the investment climate. I would say that there's we should first of all listen to the private sector that we have right here in the room, those investors that are both domestic and foreign investors who are actually, first of all, invested in Nepal. I think that's a very important first step to be able to prioritize what really are the binding constraints. And we can, then once you have that sense, I mean, having a proper dialogue between a public and private sector to understand what those things are. The most important thing that I've seen, I've worked on investment climate advisory programs across the globe, is leadership. So we heard this morning from the Prime Minister and former Prime Ministers and political leaders a broad indication of their intent to make sure that investors face a positive experience here in Nepal. Now we need to take that to a bit more specific and targeted level, to have a very high level commitment to the top 5. These are the 5 things we're going to do, and this is the timeline, and this is what is going to be the result, is the type of thing that both investors who are already here and put their funds in and those who are looking will feel shows the actual results and action. And we can see already there's a couple of things that I would highlight here in Nepal as being, we are an investor here and we have worked in this area for quite a few years. One area would be around investment approvals. So I think Nepal needs to, as Minister Jatli mentioned, also look to the international best practice. As Michelle just highlighted, you can actually leapfrog and think of, don't take the just one step, really look to the best locations who are attracting the kind of investment that you want to attract. Malaysia is one, Thailand. In many of these locations, you don't actually need an investment approval. You have good regulations, you have a negative list, you have a process of registration. You will know when your investors are here and what they're doing. So you don't actually need to approve them. And this is something that can be, I think, probably very revolutionary for investors coming into Nepal and can turn what is, an investment promotion function really into promotion rather than a combination of promotion and regulation. So that would be one suggestion. Another area to consider and think about for Nepal to improve the investment climate here is to focus on also how you, not only how you come in, but do you have the confidence of exit? Now, I know that sounds a little counterintuitive because you don't want to just invite the investor, you just want to come, also point out how they will leave. However, when you are entering high-risk developing markets, actually clear exit rules, clear guidelines about how you can either put up into an IPO if you're an equity investor, how you'll be able to look at your profits, what you'll be able to do on bringing in some of your own people. All of these things are very important to build confidence. So the ability to get out actually is what gives you the strong confidence to come in. And this is one of the things that I think Nepal should focus on to really start to attract reinvestment and new investment. And finally, I would say that a very strong prioritization of the key areas, which we already are hearing from the government, is a very important start. So we, as Dr. Wagle mentioned, we have a number of laws that are in the process of being passed, foreign investment law, the BAFIA. All of these will be an important indicator. And then to prioritize looking at the sectors that are most critical. I mean, infrastructure would be one. Obviously, from the point of IFC, we can see with the World Bank that we've seen that there's between maybe $13 to $18 billion of investment needed. And we want to put in at least $1 billion over the next 5 years. But that's not enough. We want to attract others to come with us. And to do that, you need to have very clear structures and clear rules to reduce the risk and to also allow for public-private partnerships and other sorts of agreements that give the kind of comfort and confidence for new investors to come in and put in a significant amount of funds to make Nepal's development a huge priority. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to you on the experience of Bangladesh, where you are based in the next round, if we have time. But what was striking was your point on investment approvals. And I noticed in the morning, the Honorable Minister of Industry, Navindraj Joshi, introduced himself as the chairman of the Foreign Investment Promotion Board. And just 10 minutes ago, Mr. Arun Jaitley said he was very proud that he abolished the Foreign Investment Promotion Board in India in this year's budget. So there's some hint at the direction we should probably, not taking, but at least considering when it comes to the new ways of doing business, new ways of promoting investment in this country. And I take that message loud and clear. Let's go to Ambassador Kame from Ethiopia. You'd be surprised at the degree of press coverage that your country receives in Nepal. People often compare that in per capita terms, we are alike. You are a landlocked country, very populous, proximate to the large African and the Gulf markets. And you've been doing something right in Ethiopia, growing at almost 10% per annum consistently for the last several decades. And I've had the honor of visiting your country twice in the last 3 years, and it just amazes me on the drive and the commitment and the role of the state in really pushing forward some of these transformative economic activities, from your dam on the Blue Nile to getting this flower industry off the ground from $0 in 2000 to now $700 million almost. In Nepal, we struggle with 2 Boeings in our international fleet. I think we have 60 or 70 Ethiopian airlines competing handsomely with the Turkish Airlines and taking on the mighty South African Airlines. So you've done many things right. So we want to hear from you on what were some of the major decisions on the part of the state, on the part of your political leadership, that said, let's get our acts together. And we all know the history of Ethiopia in the 1980s and the painful periods of conflict that you came through. So I think your experience would really actually inspire us on the direction we ought to be taking here in Nepal.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. First of all, I would like to congratulate the experts who are here, and thank you, the government of Nepal, for organizing this very important summit. By saying this, I would like to bring to your attention some facts from Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a very ancient country, and the second most populous country in Africa, more than 100 million people. We are expecting to become, this year 2017, the 5th largest economy in sub-Saharan Africa. That is a very huge commitment, and it is yet achievable. Ethiopia, as I said, ancient country, non-colonized in Africa, the only country which preserves its independence, and landlocked. 50% of its territory is mountainous, agrarian, and pastoralist. We have also a very big pastoralist community. The 9th in the world in the terms of the cattle production and number. huge mineral potential, untapped, and many opportunities are there. Beside all those opportunities, the country has been in poverty for many years, subsequent war, drought, and hunger was a characteristic of the country. Since 1991, the new government came to the power after 17 years of armed struggle. What we have sensed was it is a national shame we had in the country for many years. National shame because once the country was in top of civilization, you can see that from some of heritage sites we have in the country, and due to environmental and climatic variation, as well as war, subsequent war, that fame came down, and we have to restore that back. To do that, subsequent and thorough analysis of our past is very important, not to repeat it again, and we learn it from our past failures, and see forward is very important. So to do that, the political stability is very important to start up with the development works. This is the first point we have put in place. Then after that, we have crafted a very sound constitution which will bring all actors together in such a way that the democratic process is very important to tackle all those problems. Second, we started to see what are the resources we have. We have identified two major resources. One, the human element. We are the second most populous country in Africa. We have a huge young generation. And also we have land. This as a capital. Then we have start to employ this with sound policies. This is the third point which comes to tap this opportunity, is putting in place very sound development policies. We have crafted rural development policy. We have crafted investment policy. We have crafted the industrial policy. We have crafted the foreign and national security policy, education policy, health policy, water development policy, because we have around 12 big basins in the country. After identifying all resources, the development policies are very vital, and we have developed all those by the support of our development partners as well as the international community. And implementation of this is very important. And to do that, democratic process and stability, political and peace and security in the country is key factors, and we achieved that through course. So after that, our investment policy was set and put in place. After thorough analysis, we have the energy development policy to tap, because it's very important also to have infrastructure, both in energy and telecommunications, as well the road and railway infrastructure development is very crucial for bringing foreign direct investment. So after having all those opportunities at hand, we crafted and put in place a very sound, attractive investment policy and regulation, and many incentives were also put in place. And the foreign direct investment started to flow into the country. And due to that, and also the concerted efforts of all those development actors, both private, for the private investment, due regard was given. And where the private investment and the private sector is not available, the state has also its public investment put in place. And the combination of these two tools brought about development, and the economic growth started. And for last 12, 13 years, we could be able to develop, and economic growth of double digit was achieved. At least by doing that, the market issue is also very important. And in Africa, we have many market outlays, especially like COMESA, which more than 20 countries come together. Also, our development partners have given us the opportunity to make a trade with them, and all the investors who are already started to produce in the country had the access to use that market, and the profits come out, and expansion of investment and job creation. And by doing that, the capital creation became the vital one for our economic process. And this is the experience we had in the country.
Thank you very much. I think the Nepali audience would relate to your emphasis on political instability, democratic leadership, peace, security, sound constitution, which I think in your case is also a federal structure with a certain ethnic flavor, investment incentives, and market access, which is absolutely important point that you highlighted. When I visited Ethiopia, a lot of the Chinese leather industry had actually migrated to Ethiopia to take advantage of the LDC concessions in the European Union and the preferential tariff rates in the United States under AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And I used to wonder, China is just next door. Why didn't, even if just 10% of the Chinese leather industry had migrated to or relocated to Nepal to take advantage of the same concessions, the same market access, it would really have been transformative. So this, I think this is a composite package where, you know, things just have to click, and you can't really parcel these things out. The other point is also striking in the case of Ethiopia. Although you are landlocked, you rely on Djibouti, which is a much smaller transit economy. In Nepal's case, we're dealing with a very big neighbor, and which comes with lots of challenges. Let's move next to Dr. Kayveas from Malaysia. Is a former Minister of Infrastructure. Infrastructure looms large. We've touched on the theme of getting the right policies adopted so far. I think infrastructure looms large. Nepal just had the worst infrastructure in Asia, period, according to the World Economic Forum. Of the 138 economies that they have assessed, we rank 130th, and all the other countries that are below us are in sub-Saharan Africa. So we have the worst infrastructure in Asia. But we realize that with energy and transport, without a decent infrastructure, we just can't go anywhere. So we need to learn from Malaysia. Ethiopia, we're still alike in many ways, but you are growing very fast. Malaysia has been there. Maybe 30 years ago, you were at a stage where Nepal is now. But you've certainly leaped from low income to middle income status. You've certainly done many things right in infrastructure to attract world-class investment. We've read stories about the 8 samurais that relocated from Singapore to Penang and got everything started. So we'd really like to hear from you, Dr. Kayveas, on the success story of Malaysia in infrastructure in general, but also transport in particular.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panel leader, fellow panelists, Excellency, ladies, gentlemen, and all fellow delegates. Let me just give an overview on physical. Mainly, I'm going to just stick to the transportation system, not really on so much on infrastructure, but it will certainly touch on infrastructure because transport infrastructure goes together in certain areas. I'm sure you all know Malaysia was well known earlier, a world leader in rubber, tin, palm oil. We did some manufacturing, electrical equipment, and so on. But now very few people realize that the backbone to all of this is the super infrastructure, among which our multimodal transport system. And I say multimodal transport system. That includes air, train, monorail, MRT, LRT, and the roads, and so on. The two main regions, Malaysia, we have two main regions. You will see that we are separated by sea. One is the Peninsular Malaysia, and the other one is the East Malaysia. Peninsular Malaysia, we have a densely populated area with a less land area, whereas in East Malaysia, which is Borneo actually, many people know as Borneo, the land area is very big, but the population is very small. So the transportation aspect of East Malaysia was left out for a long time. And I'll briefly let you know what we are doing. Currently now, we have about 150,000 kilometers of roads, which consists of 2,000 expressways. That's how big we have grown. And we have improved tremendously on the good legacy of the road network left us by the British, actually. We followed from there. And that was the roads they created to the estates, to all the inland areas, the tin mines and all that. So we expanded on that. And early as 1970, we created the Federal Highway, that is from Kuala Lumpur to the Port Klang, they call it. That was the first federal highway which was done. And that connected also the then Subang International Airport, which was in between Klang and Kuala Lumpur. And that's the first. But subsequently, some 20 years later, it took us another 20 years actually to think about, or completing actually, we could have started it 10 years earlier. In 1994, we completed the North-South Highway. And this North-South Highway is 772 kilometers, dual lane, dual carriage highway, connecting the northern border of Thailand right up to the southern border of Singapore. That's the main infrastructure we had, if you call it infrastructure. Then this was the engine of industrialization and economic development of Malaysia. That pushed us in somewhere in 1994. And you can see our development from the 90s, 20s, and now we have gone very far ahead of many countries. Many parts of the highway now has been upgraded to 3 lanes, some even 4 lanes. And it's maximum used by everybody. And the best part of this North-South Highway is, it only takes 5 hours to reach the city. From any part of Peninsular Malaysia, it's less than 5 hours. Maximum is 5 hours to reach the city of Kuala Lumpur. That's the benefit it has given us. Now, currently, which I said earlier that the East Malaysia have been left out, we are looking at Pen-Borneo Highway. Pen-Borneo Highway, which is 1,500 kilometers of road, starting from East Malaysia, going through Sarawak on this end, and right up to Kota Kinabalu, Sabah, land beyond the wind, they call it. And of course, it connects Brunei as well. So this is the infrastructure we have. And this, we have included 114 bridges, 57 pedestrian bridges, and some 17 interchanges. And of course, along the way, we have something like about 559 bus shelters, or for bus stops for people to use it if necessary. Now, the key point is that other than the first 20 years of independence, we have since managed to keep our road infrastructure ahead of our economic growth. They always had a focus on believing that if you have proper infrastructure, proper roads, transportation becomes easy, economy can grow by itself. Now, if we look at when Subang Airport, I said International Airport in Kuala Lumpur, this was in the 70s. Within that 70s, when Singapore split from Malaysia, they built Changi Airport. And Changi Airport became the center of everything. You know, you can connect anywhere in the world now using Singapore. And at the same time, Thailand moved. Bangkok also became a super airport. You can also go to Bangkok and get a transit flight to most parts of the world. And this infrastructure was started in the earliest 70s by Singapore and Thailand. But Malaysia took another 10 years to look at another airport. And that is why we have this KLIA, they call it KLIA 2, you know, low-cost airport and so on. But we have two airports now, two terminals, Kuala Lumpur International Airport 1, Kuala Lumpur International Airport 2. And of course, the Klang Valley, where Kuala Lumpur is, we have about 7 million people, population there. And if you look at it, our traffic system is only congested during peak hours. When they go to work and when they come back from work or school and so on. You know, a wise man used to say, if people work and school in the same place, you won't have traffic jam. You don't have to travel another 30, 40 kilometers every day in the morning for work and school, and that causes a lot of traffic jam. But then you got to have community, city-based, major planning. I think Japan, to a certain extent, have done that. Now, Malaysia also has the world's highest car ownership, if you look at the population, and also among the 5 lowest car prices. We make our own car, and that gives us about 650 vehicles per 100 person. And that's also among the top 5 in the world. I think USA is about 750, and the UK is about 450. I stand to be corrected. Now, the reasons, the recent development, we had flood. In between, we had flood. You know, we have this monsoon coming in during November, December, and January sometimes. We created a 13-kilometer smart tunnel. You can see in National Geography, CNN sometimes. It's the first of the kind in the world. It's a smart tunnel. It's used as a tunnel for cars during peak hours. But in the event of flood, we use that as drainage. We can divert all the water, flood excessive water, into this tunnel to take it out away from the city. And you can look up on this, it's in Google or anywhere it is there, and you can learn more about it. And of course, all these road systems, including smart tunnel and all that, we have about 150,000 kilometers of quality roads. There's another aspect. You need quality roads. You can just build roads, you know, but you need some quality roads. You spoil your vehicles, vehicles damage the roads if it is not properly done, and this is a very important factor. So we have about roads now serving about 20 million vehicles. That's about 7 kilometers per 1,000 vehicle. We also have state head of other form of transportation, LRT, MRT. So we have started this LRT and MRT early as 1995. And currently we have 6 main lines, 92 stations of 123 kilometers, catering a daily ridership of close to 500,000 just within the city. We have created this. And it's now being, of course, extensively extended. And we have included another 152 stations and another 172 kilometers coverage, so that the city is getting congested. They can go a little bit out of the city, which is areas which is about 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers out of the city. And so we won't be caught with this traffic congestion when it comes to 20 years down the line. We have also our own monorail. We started it a little bit earlier. And we have a high-speed rail link now between Kuala Lumpur and the KLIA airport. When KLIA was chosen to be in Sepang, on area, everybody protested. They said that it is too far. You know, Subang was so near, and Kuala Lumpur International Airport is so far, and people find it difficult to travel. But we had this high-speed train now, we have it. It only takes 29 minutes between Kuala Lumpur Airport, both the airports, to the central, Kuala Lumpur Central in Kuala Lumpur city itself. That connects us within 29 minutes. Of course, I am not leaving out bus services. We have something like about 900 buses, 200 bus routes, which also mainly used by people in the rural area. And of course, now lately, we have just signed this with the government of Singapore, high-speed train, high-speed rail, HSR, they call it, in Malaysia, connecting Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. It takes about 4 to 6 hours, depends on traffic. If you drive fast, if you have a Ferrari or if you have some BMW, you may do it in 4 hours plus, but normal traffic takes 6 hours. But with this high-speed train, which has been already signed now, it takes only 1.5 hours to connect Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. I can go to Singapore, have my meeting, have my breakfast or lunch, and then come back to KL. I don't have to stay in a hotel, save a lot of money. And of course, I must say this, this high-speed rail will eventually link up with Kunming in China to the envisioned East-West Silk Route link. I think you all know about the Silk Route. So probably in the next decade, I may be able to catch a high-speed train from Kuala Lumpur to Nepal. You know, I didn't need to fly. Okay, just... So we have, of course, beside land and sea, we talked about Air Asia. It's not fair if I don't touch on Air Asia and the success of Tan Sri Tony Fernandes, who have made Kuala Lumpur a hub for anyone can fly. You know, so KLIA 2 has become a situation where if Singapore is a busy airport, can connect major cities, but from using Air Asia from Kuala Lumpur, KLIA 2, people can go anywhere, many cities. Even in India, I think they fly to many cities. So in a nutshell, successful factors are proactive planning, which we have always stayed ahead. We have our 5-year ahead plan. We call it a 5-year plan, and we stay ahead of this. And then, of course, technology adaptations, like the tunnel and monorail and all that. Privatization policy, and of course, a stable government and independence that has given continuously support to us. Now, when I say stable government, well, many won't agree with this, but that is the key factor. Many people don't understand this. That's the key factor is a stable government. If you don't have political stability, you can do nothing in a country. You are going to spend time fighting, and nothing can ever happen. So we emphasize, of course, I'm in politics myself, we emphasize stability of the government. We say, okay, if you have another group of people can administer the country, if you are good, give it to them. But until then, let the people in power do the work. And one very important thing we always emphasize, facilitate the people who are in business. You want to clap, you can clap, you know. Facilitate the people in business. Don't frustrate them. When they come to do business, they want things done expeditiously, fast. They brought in their money, they brought in their workers, they brought in the infrastructure, and there you are, policy decisions, rules and regulations are slowing you down. And you cannot move at all until you're lost before you start the project. So facilitating must be done rather than frustrating. And of course, now we have our TN50 vision. That's for 2050, I must say that. Our Honorable Prime Minister, Sri Najib Mohamad, the present Prime Minister, have focused and put in technology. He wants to make Malaysia e-commerce and also e-transportation system. And of course, in conclusion, you all are most welcome to experience whatever I said in Malaysia. Thank you very much.
Wow, that is amazing list of in the of infrastructure and particularly transport. I think it would be wonderful to take that smart train from Singapore to KL to Bangkok to Hanoi to Kunming to Sigatse, then Kathmandu, then onwards to Delhi. So let's have a vision. Emphasized stability. Nepal has had very stable periods before 1990, and if you go back in history, But I think stability without vision actually doesn't produce much. And you talked about 2,000 expressways. In Nepal, we've been talking about one expressway. We don't have any expressways right now. We've been talking about one expressway to connect Kathmandu with the Tarai, with the Indian border, that would shorten the distance from about 10 hours to 1 hour since 1974. So the big message, I think, from your wonderful presentation on the achievements is let's get it done. One done. I think that's the big message. Thank you. Last but not least, Ambassador Morris, who is the resident ambassador of the United Kingdom in Kathmandu. What's striking about the UK is really, you actually are a major recipient of foreign direct investment. You know, when we talk about flows of FDI, people often think of, Western money coming into China, India, Vietnam, Ethiopia, Malaysia. But UK is actually one of the top recipients of FDI. So what's the logic for this North-North FDI? What does it take to beat your other northern peers? Why should investment come to Britain and not to France? So what are some of the policy lessons that even least developed countries like Nepal can take from the UK experience?
Well, Swarnim, thank you very much, and thanks to the other panelists as well for fascinating introductions, for fascinating summaries on their issues. I speak, and I'm going to say a few comments based on being the British ambassador here in Nepal, but also in previous roles as a British diplomat, having run teams of inward investment promotion agents in both developed and emerging markets. And so having run those teams and having presented to board members and others about why they should come to the UK, the very questions you were asking, my comments are informed by those conversations. I'd also say, thank you for what you said about the UK's success in attracting investment. Yes, it is really important to us to attract inward investment. We are the most attractive destination for foreign direct investment in Europe. We attract more FDI than any other country in Europe. Ernst & Young do a survey of attractiveness of countries. We're the most attractive to inward investors in Europe as well. It's very important for us to get that investment in. And in 15-16 was another record year for us in terms of attracting investment. We got in around 2,000 projects into the UK that either create or safeguard tens of thousands of jobs for our economy. And I think we haven't said it yet, but we attract investment not because there's an esoteric interest in getting those numbers up, but because it's about jobs and healthcare and schools and things that make a difference to ordinary people. So yes, we make a big effort to attract inward investment. And as a civil servant, I've been quite involved in that process, talking to companies. And you said, what are the sorts of things that we talk about with investors? What have I heard investors looking for in the UK? And I suppose they fall into a few different categories. One of the things that investors would ask about and are interested in for us is predictability. Uncertainty is expensive. And so if you know what's going to happen, the more you can know what's going to happen, investors would always tell us, it reduces costs. And so political stability, we've had several panelists touch on, is one of those things. There are always events, things will come up, but investors want to know what are the structures in which you will handle those events. And that's the sort of predictability that they'll be looking for and that they would talk to us about. So it's predictability in terms of the systems of government that you have. It's predictability in terms of the rule of law, so that what laws there are not just on paper, but they are being implemented. They want to know that what they read is what's going to happen as well. And also, it's about your legal and judicial system. They want to know from us what's going to happen, and will that legal system be transparent? Can they expect what's written to be what actually occurs? So predictability is one of the things that investors would talk to us about. Simplicity is another thing. And again, others have touched on this. But people don't necessarily want to talk to me about long government processes. Where we can, we want to streamline processes, and in other cases, just not have a process. Don't make people be engaged with government. And so try to try to get rid of all this, the need for contact with government that you can. And then, if you've got to have contact with government or systems, make it as simple and user-friendly as possible. So that for business, they just don't have to think about it very much. So make it as simple as possible. So predictability and simplicity. And then infrastructure. People are really interested in our infrastructure. And so they want to know, can they fly their people in? Can they fly them out? How long does it take to travel around? Distribution networks, do all of those things work? So that type of infrastructure. But they're also interested in the sort of ecosystem infrastructure for investors. And so that's not just the roads, that's just that if they're interested in IT, for example, they're interested in how do the university system work? How do you produce the graduates? What sort of research are your universities doing? And how can that link? And how can they be involved with that link into the education sector? How can they be linked in with other companies that are working in the IT sector, let's say? And so we have Silicon Roundabout in London, an area where there are lots of a very large number now of IT companies located. So they're interested in infrastructure, both in the sense of the classic, the roads, the airports, but infrastructure in terms of the ecosystem that exists for investors too. And I think you were interested then in sort of where does that go if you're in Nepal and the sorts of things that investors talk about. And I suppose in my experience they fall into the same sorts of areas, of course. But I would say, of course, with this audience, many of whom are business people, I'd want us to be listening, as you said, to them rather than saying. But some of the things that I hear about. Again, predictability. People are interested in the system of government. They want to know how stable the country is. They're interested in political stability, what that means, and predictability. They come to me. People we talk to about investment are interested in the legal system, and the things that you might do differently if you're asking about that are thinking just about the sorts of things that affect you in the transparency indices. We know what they are. They're to do anti-corruption measures, having a legislation in place, making sure that wherever you've got that legislation, that it is actually being implemented in a predictable way as well. And that where you have organizations who are involved, the Investment Board of Nepal, for example, that people understand how it works and they know what the systems are, and they can see how those processes are operating. And I should say that the UK has been quite involved through our Department for International Development, helping and hopefully supporting the work of the IBN. So yes, there's some things in terms of predictability. I think there's some things in terms of simplicity. And so making sure that where there is legislation, that it is actually being implemented. A lot of legislation has been passed recently, positive steps. You touched on some of that legislation. There's also the opportunity of draft legislation that's there at the moment, the FITA, others. But thinking about, do you need, and you touched on this point as well, do you need to have contact with government in there? Are there ways that you could decide that no, you don't, that you could fast-track things, you could fast-track things for reinvestment? Can you fast-track anything in terms of investment in certain sectors, investment at a certain threshold? You know, does government want to have a role in those areas? And then if government does have a role, streamlining that as much as possible. And then in terms of infrastructure, as I would say, and just thinking about what infrastructure do we have and how do we link that up. And the ecosystem point, I think, touches on some of the things that you were talking about from an ICT company perspective. I'd also say, and perhaps this echoes your point as well, about urgency, about trying to do this as quickly as possible. We're very conscious that capital is mobile, that it can go somewhere else, and that we're competing for it. So we need to act fast as business, to actually get that investment into the UK. So civil servants, the whole system needs to work as fast as possible to make sure you've got that investment coming in, and that you're moving at the speed of business, if you like, to try to get that investment into your country, because it's benefits that you want for this generation. I heard people talking this morning about creating those jobs so people don't have to go overseas, but creating them jobs so this generation can actually benefit, and so working as fast as you can to actually attract that in. And so simplicity, predictability, infrastructure, and perhaps urgency as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Very powerful messages. I think the gentleman to my right emphasized stability, and I was thinking, God, Nepal is doomed. You know, the way our constitution has been designed, embeds a degree of instability in our system. But what encouraged me, Ambassador Morris, was your emphasis was not on stability, but on predictability. So that gave me some hope that even in a politically unstable system, maybe you can design institutions, you can design incentive structures in a manner that assures a degree of policy continuity and policy predictability. So there's one hope there, and maybe there's some work to be done as we think through this. Now, I'm conscious of the time constraint. We can either go for a quick second round of supplementary questions, but I think the first round was absolutely comprehensive and quite sufficient. If there's interest in the room to ask particular questions, we could also open up the floor to maybe 2 or 3 questions. So is there a show of hands? Okay, 1, 2. Would you like to go for a second round? For a quick second round, maybe a minute each, and then we can accommodate 1 or 2 questions. Okay, let's start with Wendy. Maybe you would want to say something supplementary. That Bangladesh story, I'm always intrigued. The 2 major political leaders, the counterpart of Sherbadur Deuba and KP Oli in Bangladesh, don't even talk to each other. Yet they've managed to rally around a common purpose. 6% economic growth sustained for the last 16 years. A country dismissed as a basket case, now a bright star on the South Asian map. So amazing lessons to be learned from Bangladesh. Maybe you could share with us what you've seen in Dhaka.
All right. 60 seconds on how to get one sector moving. So I would focus, I think there is some great examples to be taken from Bangladesh, and one area I would focus on is power and energy. So quite a couple years, now maybe 6 to 8 years, 8 to 10 years back, Bangladesh was in a very poor situation on power, quality, the blackouts, etc. And there was a decision, I think, across the board that this was foundational and it had to be addressed. And I think there's 3 things that I can say that have really made that sector successful. First of all, has been the coordination within different parts of the government and ministries. So this was such a priority, it went right to the top that no ministries were allowed to fight about issues on power and energy. So there was strong coordination of all the agencies and the ministries around that objective to get more generation on the ground. The second was that there was clear understanding and clear delineation of what needed to be done by the public sector and where we should focus on getting the private sector to do the work for us. So generation is done on an IPP, independent power producer basis mostly. And the public sector focuses on getting the interconnections, reliability of the transmission. And the third thing is making sure that predictability that Ambassador Morris mentioned is there for those investors coming in, at least transparency of the rules around how you would come in as an independent power producer, a bankable PPA. We bank on that PPA. IFC has backed more than 1,000 megawatts of power into Bangladesh in the last few years, and Bangladesh overall has increased their generation capacity from around 6,000 megawatts to now 12,000, aiming for 20,000 megawatts within the next few years. So it's been effective. Now they still could do more. They still could do a much stronger bid and auction process. They could probably even get better prices and better and a better deal coming in. But that sort of focus has really made a difference, let's say, in power and energy. So that's just one example. There's a couple others, but my 60 seconds, I'm sure, is up.
Ambassador Kame.
Very quick. I think Ethiopia can give a very good experience to Nepal in terms of this economic growth and the investment issue. As I said, Ethiopia is mountainous. This country is mountainous. We have a lot of river. You have a lot of river. From this, we are now building a very huge dams to produce energy and to trade it to our neighbors. The same is true to your country. You have very good neighbors around, country with big economy like India, and have negotiated water use treaty together and put investors to develop these dams, and energy can be easily traded to your neighbor. So this is very important really to think about investing in this energy area after you have a very sound energy policy. The other issue is we are landlocked country. We are using a port of Djibouti. You are using a port of India, and really have a very good and sound infrastructure being built. What we have had is a very good really to transport that good which is required for our investment and local use, and to foster our economic growth. The same is true the diversity we have in the country. We have more than 80 nations and nationalities and ethnic groups. You have around 120 and more. So you can see really bringing all those nationalities in harmony to develop the country is very important. And I think that is the experience we had to bring all our nationalities together to foster our economic development after thorough analysis of the failures we have in the past. So this is the points I would like to bring to your attention.
Thank you. Michelle?
So we talked a bit about how to build an infrastructure for the future. And I think there's a few things that the government of Nepal can do to build the infrastructure of the future from an ICT perspective in order to have an e-government that really enables the citizens. And so the first thing would be to digitize. There's a lot of paper, and that creates challenges in finding information. It creates lengthy processes. So digitizing the documents that you do have, being able to search for that, share that through a common collaboration platform would be the very first step. The other thing would be around building e-services, and so starting with some basic services. There's cities in Indonesia, for example, very simple smartphone applications that allow citizens to identify that there's a pothole, and then those potholes get fixed very quickly because they've built e-services around that, or online registration. And with smartphone penetration, this becomes much more possible. But that would also require building solid access to information for citizens. And that's another thing, speaking of Bangladesh, that Bangladesh has worked on quite a bit, is how to build basic e-services and then train women in being able to service those in remote villages, remote areas, so that they can then enable the rest of the citizens to get the access to the government services. And so those are a number of things that speak to what Ambassador Morris was talking about as far as the streamlining, the predictability. Using IT to do that and provide services to citizens is the first step.
Ambassador, would you like to add something?
Normally at this point people ask me about Brexit. So I was going to say that, and perhaps is Brexit affecting investment? So I'm ready to tell you that we're having lots of investments still. Aldi have just invested £300 million in the UK. Facebook are increasing their presence by 50%. So we're getting lots of investment still, and Brexit's an opportunity, and we're doing it. But it makes me reflect on getting the story out there. And how do you get your story out there? And I suppose one of those things that I'm taking from this is just about being able to say, these are the things we've said we're doing to improve the climate for investors. and this is what we've done, and this is where we were going. So where would we want to be in a year from now? I think Wendy said what are your 5 things, and how are you going to drive to work on them? So I suppose my thought is just about getting the message out and thinking, taking from an event like this, what are the number of things, the 5 big things we're hearing, and how are we going to take them forward and get out that message about what Nepal is doing with events, I suppose, like this conference. And congratulations again to those who pulled it together.
Wonderful. Now I'm really conflicted on whether to open the floor or to close the session. May I get a hint from the organizers on, can we go up to 6 o'clock? Okay, 2 questions. Okay, let me open the floor. Please be succinct and direct your question at a specific person. Yes, sir. Is there a mic that can be? It's coming. It's on its way.
Thanks for this session. I'm Darshan Raniar from USA and also from Nepal. I am a big fan of Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, who really built the Malaysia. So I have a couple questions. One is, when he was building Malaysia, he moved the whole government offices, ministries, bureaucrats to a place called Putrajaya, where he integrated all these functions of the government. So did that help expedite the development of Malaysia? That's my first question. And the second question is, when chip technology was advancing during 90s, Malaysia played a really huge role in bringing investment from US and also Japan in building those wafer industries, which is basically driving all the technology and communication industries today. And what was his role? How did he brought those investment in Malaysia? And what are the policies that he played? I think Nepal should look for Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, and Japan development, infrastructure, and the leaders, kind of leaders that the people brought, who were really visionary. And by bringing those kind of leaders, they had a big vision, put the policies in place, and really get the work going. Thanks.
Thank you. One more. Nobody? Okay. So the question is on Malaysia and the role Prime Minister Mahathir played in really having Malaysia take off, including the specific attraction of investment from the US and the way he, for example, reorganized the capital city in Putrajaya and all that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Firstly, Mahathir, actually, we can say Tun Mahathir is they call him father of modern Malaysia. They given him this title. And he took over as Prime Minister somewhere 80, 81, 82, that early as that. Then he had difficulty on politics itself until for the next 6 years. But when he cleared that and he came back strongly to power, what he decided to bring Malaysia to a different level. He said it's time that we use our resources and time that this country should go to a different level. And he created Vision 2020. This is started somewhere in 90, Vision 2020. So he said that by the year 2020, Malaysia should be a fully developed nation and it should have all the infrastructure and, of course, many other facilities, education, health, and all that. So he copied, I would say, not necessarily copied, but he took the ideas from various developed countries. He took Australia as an example of Canberra, and then USA as an example of Washington. So he built a separate administrative capital that's called Putrajaya. He created a vast area out of the city, and this also connects to transportation because he felt that the couple of million civil servants who are working in the city of Kuala Lumpur also contribute to the traffic jams and the traffic situation. So if he says he takes out Putrajaya, build Putrajaya and take out all the civil servants to a different place, house them there, keep them there, and they work there, then he can also contribute to this infrastructure and, of course, his traffic woes and all that. So then, apart from that, of course, he needed the foreign investment, FDIs to come in. So we used to also call him the best salesman Malaysia had. So he started traveling to all the countries and started asking them to come in and invest in Malaysia. And that period, I think we were very good, very successful. And I think he's still remembered for all his achievements.
Thank you. On that very positive and inspiring note, we conclude this session. I'd like to thank all the distinguished panelists. I don't want to summarize everything that was said. This was an extremely rich and substantive discussion, touching many bases. I think the diversity of perspectives, different industries, different countries, I think all that came out very strongly. But let me just take one major message from each of the panelists. I think Wendy's point on listening to the private sector, having that political commitment backed by actual deeds and coordination, just learning from international best practice. You know, there's a plethora of all these international benchmarking exercises. Just set a target and get it done. I think that was very important. Ambassador Morris, very simple message on simplicity, predictability, and some of the fundamental legal basis that you would need to undergird any credible investment regime. I think that was very powerful. And even though you were talking about the British experience, I think we can really learn from that. Michelle, would like to invite Microsoft to invest in Nepal. I know the power of anchor investment. If Microsoft comes, there will be hundreds of others. There's a herd mentality in the FDI universe, and we hope to mimic what Intel did for Costa Rica and what Intel did for Vietnam. That's our dream, to have one of the big names really choose to locate in Nepal, with the Indian and the Chinese markets as one of their things. But your emphasis on really leapfrogging, adopting these modern technologies, adopting e-government, digitizing things, creating smart cities. I think ICT will really give us that opportunity. And as we head towards local elections after a glaring vacuum of 20 years, I think the 700 or 800 local entities that we would create would really create that space for the new leadership to really adopt the new technologies. Last time these local elections were around, there was no internet perhaps, or it was in its baby steps. So this amazing, tantalizing potential in really adopting this modern technology to leapfrog is very encouraging. The Malaysian story, self-evident, wonderful statistics, the list of achievements. I've already asked for your copy so that I can publicize it, but that simple figure, that you have 2,000 expressways, I'll never forget it, and all your other statistics, and the story of Mahathir. And that last point that you made about how the Prime Minister of the country is should be the biggest cheerleader, should be the biggest, the most articulate, the most convincing salesman or saleswoman for that country, is actually extremely important. And you look at some of the successful countries that have really attracted substantial FDI, a lot of that can be attributed to the proactive approach of the top person in government. You look at India, Narendra Modi, visiting Facebook and Google and wooing individual companies and tempting them to locate in India. I think that has had an effect to go with the Make in India campaign and a lot of the other initiatives that is put in place. So Lee Kuan Yew, Mahathir, even the Chinese leadership, you see that throughout the world, that a degree of proactive assertiveness to sell your own country is actually very important. And we see this in the business delegations of a lot of the European leaders when they travel abroad, that 80% of their delegations is comprised of private sector people. And Ambassador Kame from Ethiopia, lots of stories that are similar. From your stories on dams and landlockedness to the role of the state, to just getting some of the industries off the ground is really inspiring for Nepal. And although we're alike still, I think looking back 10 years later, we would have identified some of these years as the point of divergence, the great divergence between Nepal and Ethiopia, but lots to learn from a fellow LDC, Ethiopia. So with those words, thanking you, audience, for your patient hearing and your participation and attendance, I close this session. Thank you very much.